Good morning to you and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this Thursday morning. Nice to see you. Hope you're well and cheerful, and thank you so much for joining us for our Bible talk for today, continuing our adventure through the incredible book of Genesis. And it really is quite an adventure, isn't it? So as we continue now, we're in chapter 21. So without further ado, here goes. The Lord dealt with Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time at which God had spoken to him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to his son whom Sarah bore him. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Now Sarah said, God has brought laughter to me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And she said, who would ever have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I had borne him a son in his old age. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom he had borne to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. So she said to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac. The matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for it's through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation of him also, because he is your offspring. So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. As she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bowshoot, for she said, do not let me look on the death of the child. When she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God calling to Hagar from heaven, and said to her, what troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and make him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. She went and filled the skin with water, and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got for him a wife from the land of Egypt. At that time, Abimelech, with Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now therefore swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me, or with my offspring, or with my posterity. But as I've dealt loyally with you, you will deal with me, and with the land where you have resided as an alien. And Abraham said, I swear it. When Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized, Abimelech said, I do not know who's done this. You did not tell me, and I have not heard of it until today. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a covenant. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs of the flock, and Abimelech said to Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you set apart? He said, these 7 ewe lambs you shall accept from my hand, in order that you may be a witness for me that I dug this well. Therefore that place was called Beersheba, because there both of them swore an oath. When they had made a covenant at Beersheba, Abimelech, with Phicol the commander of the army, left and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and called there on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham resided as an alien many days in the land of the Philistines. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, my friends, we continue the adventure with Abraham here, reminding us always what a human being character Abraham really was. Abraham had his good times and he had his bad times. He was a man of great faith, but he also had great frailties as well. But there are three sections in this chapter. There's 1 to 7, there's 8 to 21, and there's 22 to 34. Taking them one section at a time. Verses 1 to 7 has the arrival to Sarah of the son Isaac. Let's not forget, just feel again the emotion that's going on here. that they've waited 20 years for this. This son has been a long time coming. They've tried to help God on his way in various things through Lot and Eleazar and Hagar and everything. And finally, after 20 years of waiting, Isaac is born. And there's some ironies here about the son, the name Isaac, which means laughter. And there's a bit of ambiguity whether Sarah is basically saying, she'll laugh with me, isn't it amazing I've done such a thing? Or it could be that she's kind of laughing, there's a bit of teasing going on here as well. There's a bit of an edge to this too, possibly. But I think what the Bible is trying to say very clearly is that God did what God said God was going to do. So verse 1, the Lord dealt with Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. So chapter 21 is very clearly reinforcing the message that God did what God said God was going to do, if you see what I mean. That it's been a long time coming, and you can see they've been on a heck of an adventure the last 20 years. And as I said, they've tried to help God on his way, and so on and so on and so on. But finally, after 20 years, this son, Isaac, has been born. And especially bear that in mind when you listen to the chapter tomorrow, you kind of see why that's really important. So this son is born, God said he would be born. They've tried various things to help God on his way. There must have been through ups and huge amounts of downs as well, and despair and everything else. And let's not forget, it's not just the birth of a son here. This is also the birth of a promise too. God promised they would not just have a son, but be a father of many nations. So kind of see that in there as well, really. So, but chapter 21 is very clearly saying that 20 years before, God said Abraham would have a son. And here, in precise detail, exactly what God said God would do, God has done. So that's very clear. So, and I think there's kind of a message for us when we kind of understand, how long, O Lord, and it can be a real struggle sometimes. That here in chapter 21, it's clear to say that God did what God said God was going to do. The next few verses then, in 8 to 21, you then have this biplane between Sarah and Hagar. Let's not forget that Abraham's already got a son called Ishmael by his slave woman Hagar. And I think you get the impression that that Ishmael's probably about sort of 13 at this stage. And it says that Sarah saw Ishmael playing with Isaac, which sounds like a nice thing, and it may well have been. There's some thought that it may be that Isaac was taunting Isaac, that Ishmael was taunting Isaac, not be very nice to him, possibly. Or it could be simply a question of jealousy. There's obviously so a lot of animosity between Sarah and Hagar. In the past, Hagar had been sent away, but Abraham had kind of said, it's just that she comes back and so on. And then the son is born, and Sarah's clearly very unhappy about the fact that Ishmael is playing with Isaac. And God says, he said, do what Sarah says, send the woman away, because Isaac is the one through whom the promise is. Then Hagar goes away, and then she thinks the boy is going to die, but she cries out, but God hears her. And I suppose what's actually comes through this is that Abraham has two sons, and yes, from here on in, all the focus now is on Isaac from here on in, and we don't hear much about Ishmael again. But what is clear is that actually Abraham still loves Ishmael. That's very clear. Abraham doesn't want any harm on Ishmael, and he prays for him. And actually, after she's out in the wilderness, God hears the cries of Hagar, and God hears the cries of Ishmael. So God loves them as well. So the promise is to go through Isaac, of course, but God still cares about Hagar, and God still cares about Ishmael. He's still Abraham's son, and God still cares about him. So that's the second view, the next view. And then the last section is verses 22 to the end. We have this kind of border dispute. You have this guy, Abimelech, appears again. Abraham's moved south just to go the bit between Israel, now to call it, and Egypt. They're kind of knocking around there. And there's this dispute between Abraham and Abimelech. And what's quite interesting is that Abimelech is quite wary of Ishmael, quite wary of Abraham, because Abimelech knows that God is with Abraham. Therefore, touch this guy at your peril. Just be nice to him, because he's got friends in very high places. God's with him, and Abimelech knows that. And Abimelech, being a wise man, he brings his commander with him, which is kind of called Phicol, which is quite interesting because Abimelech's obviously quite concerned. And they form this covenant. And Abraham is allowed to live there in the kind of land of the Philistines. Interesting enough, not far away from where Ishmael settles down, actually, which is quite interesting too. So Abraham maybe gets to still see his two sons after all. And then they form this covenant between the two, Abimelech and Abraham, this kind of agreement. And then, but notice that and Abraham then settles there for a while. But it's interesting that from there, under the tamarisk tree, that Abraham worships God. That wherever Abraham goes, Abraham worships God, and actually so should we. And that God is everywhere, and wherever we go, we can still worship God. And even if we're in hotel rooms, we can say morning prayer or whatever. We can pray, and God is with us wherever we go. So 3 things from this chapter. Firstly, verses 1 to 7 is all about God is faithful to his promise. God did what God was going to do. Then there's this dispute between Sarah and Hagar, but they part the way. And the promise is with Isaac, but actually God still cares about Hagar and cares about Ishmael and makes a great nation of him too. And then finally we have this border dispute in the end, in which Abimelech, being a wise person, knows that God is with Abraham, and therefore makes peace and forms this covenant with him. And wherever Abraham goes, even though he's away from home, even living in the land of the Philistines, Abraham still worships God. Bless you, my friends. Have a lovely day, and see you again tomorrow.